MicroBrewr Podcast, Session 33.
Welcome to MicroBrewr Podcast, inspiring you as you start your own microbrewery or take your existing brewery to the next level. Here's your host, Nathan Pierce.
Welcome to MicroBrewr Podcast. We talk about everything craft beer related with the focus for people looking at starting their own microbrewery and wanting to take their existing brewery to the next level. I'm your host, Nathan Pierce. Thanks for listening, everybody. I'm really glad you're here. I really appreciate all the feedback that I get and tweets and emails and things. It's pretty cool to know that people are listening, even though we don't get to talk face to face. Please subscribe to the podcast in iTunes or Stitcher. When you subscribe, rate, and review, it's so much easier. You'll just get every episode right to you. You won't miss a thing. And I also want to encourage you to support MicroBrewr. I set up a page at microbrewer.com/support MicroBrewr. There are a few different easy ways that you could support MicroBrewr at varying levels of effort. So please go over to microbrewer.com/support MicroBrewr and help out the podcast any way you can. If you've been enjoying the show, if you've been getting a lot of information and insight out of the podcast and the website, this is a way that you can give back. Thank you very much. In this episode, I talk with John Mercer from Brewery Wastewater Design. He's in Montrose, Colorado. He has over a decade's worth of experience with wastewater design and operation in breweries and other facilities. And wastewater is something that's really important to a microbrewery. In case you haven't heard, you're going to have to do something about the water that's coming off of your site. Sometimes you could just send it straight to the municipal wastewater treatment facility. Sometimes it gets more complicated than that, especially if your quantities are going to be really high. So this episode gives us a lot of insight into that. John has a lot of expertise, and John has agreed to answer any questions that you might have about it. So if you go to the show notes at microbrewer.com/session 33, John's going to be monitoring the questions over there, and he'll answer as many as he can for the next 30 days. So be sure, if you have any questions after this episode, go to microbrewer.com/session 33 and ask John what you're struggling with. Here's the interview. Hey, John, I introduced you to the listeners. Let's take a few minutes and you could tell us more about you and your business.
Yeah, I've been in brewing. Well, let me back up even further. I've been in doing water and wastewater work since 1996 in Oregon, and been doing brewery work or brewery wastewater specific work since 1998. That experience initially was at a private laboratory doing drinking water and wastewater laboratory work, and Deschutes Brewery was one of the clients. So I got to know the guys pretty well over at Deschutes, and eventually the guy that I was doing the work for wound up leaving the company. So I kind of stepped right in and took over where he left off. And at that time, it was kind of a crazy time at Deschutes with regard to wastewater. They had just started a brand new anaerobic treatment plant at the brewery. So this thing was like a 30,000 gallon test tube. It was the first of its kind anywhere in the world.
How did you get into that? Did you go to school for this kind of thing?
I went to school for environmental biology, and one of my favorite classes was microbiology, and got into the water and wastewater laboratory pretty much out of college. Not straight out of college, but fairly soon. And so I was doing microbiology work as my job, and was pretty good. I was liking it a lot. Actually, strangely enough, I did a fair amount of travel in the area, and I was new to Oregon at the time. So I really got to learn what was around us, and it was great. But then when the guy at Deschutes Brewery left, the guy I was working for at the laboratory, when he left, I kind of stepped right in because I knew the people at the city who were the brewery's regulators. I knew them already. They liked me. I liked them. And one of the brewery and the city were kind of in this adversarial relationship at the time. So I was able to come in and kind of smooth that out and get everybody friendly with each other again. That was a big deal. One of the things I always recommend, which you'd be surprised at how often it happens, is do not get into an adversarial relationship with your regulators. And it doesn't matter if it's the TTB or if it's your wastewater regulators. Just keep things professional and friendly, even if you don't agree.
Yeah, basically, like, we have to look at them as partners, right? Like, they have something that we need. We need a permit to operate, or we need a license. And there's no point in viewing them as the bad guy, regulator, mean policeman, or something like that. They want us to be in business because we're giving taxes to the city or whatnot, and we need the permit to operate. So it's better just to work together, and that'll help relations, and it'll make them more likely to want to process our application sooner, right?
Exactly. It makes everything smoother. Make sure, it doesn't matter who it is, agree with them or not, friendly and professional.
I would imagine, like, people in government agencies are just like people anywhere. There's some people who are just grumps. They're in a bad mood all the time. And if my brewery happens to be in an area with somebody who's difficult to work with, it doesn't help to feed back into that. I may as well just try and be as nice, cordial, and professional as possible, which will help my applications and permits get processed as soon as possible. So how long did you work at Deschutes?
I think 11 and a half years. I think January 1st of 2010 is when I left. And I left in order to ride my bicycle halfway around the world with my wife. And we actually did that. We rode our bikes from New Zealand to Nepal for 2 years. And it was amazing. Best 2 years ever. Best decision you could ever make doing something like that, or anything, just kind of quit the rat race and reevaluate everything you know about life, because it all changes, especially when you get into Asia, or developing areas where it's completely not like here in the U.S. You see the resourcefulness, how friendly people are. Anyway, left Deschutes to do all that, and after I came back from the trip, kind of still wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to do. So I was a ski op, worked at a ski area for a season and did a few other things off and on, but came back into the brewery work, because this is really, the people are the greatest, the industry is the greatest, and it's very much a growth industry as well.
So your most experience in the brewing industry is with wastewater. So you have your own consulting firm now for helping breweries deal with their wastewater?
Yeah. I kind of pigeonhole myself into the wastewater world, but I have a lot of background in pretty much all other aspects of brewing. I'm not a brewer, I'm not a packaging guy, but I've been around enough expansions and all this equipment over the years.
Focus is good. I've been told that I don't know if there's any of the other beer podcast producers out there listening to this one. I don't listen to too many other beer podcasts, but I've been told that One of the listeners sent me an email. Actually, I'm going to mention that. Steve Zmack took me to a homebrew club here in the Monterey area, and he sent me an email. He's like, wow, I haven't seen any other beer podcasts that are on the business side of it. That's so cool. And, that's what I am interested in. I want to start a brewery, and this is my way to learn about it. And I realize there are others out there who need to learn about it too. So I feel really good about helping people in that way. And I guess that's what you're really focusing on. So let's talk about wastewater. What does that mean, wastewater? Because when I was looking into putting my business plan together, I sort of just assumed that all the water, if it doesn't go into a keg or a bottle or a can, then if there's any like rinse water or water that's basically not beer, it's just going to go down the drain and the city's wastewater treatment plant will handle it. But you're telling me that's not the case. I got to pay attention to this stuff.
Yeah. The wastewater coming out of a brewery is compared to like municipal or household wastewater, which these wastewater treatment plants were designed to treat household wastewater for the most part. But brewery wastewater has a lot of sugar in it and a lot of alcohol in it relative to household wastewater. So for a small amount of water, you've got a lot of food in there. So it's quite a bit different just in nature. There's some other differences as well that we'll get into. But so coming out of a brewery, you wouldn't quite imagine it this way, but there's actually 3 or 4 wastewater streams coming out of a brewery. You've got your floor drains out in the production area, brew house, cellar area, packaging area. That's one system. You've got your kitchen, if you have a kitchen, if it's a brew pub, or maybe no kitchen if it's a production brewery. But anyway, that's separate. That's another one because it has potential for grease. And then there's a third one, which is restrooms. Restroom is pretty much what I was describing, what's coming out of the household. That's what wastewater treatment plants were designed to treat. And then the last one is kind of an optional one, and I call it side stream. It's things that are really concentrated sources of wastewater. So things like spent yeast, trube coming out of the whirlpool, fermenter blow off, waste beer, like beer that's coming back in kegs, or beer that's trapped in lines before, at the beginning, at the end of a packaging run, those types of things. So there's really, 3 to 4 different types of wastewater coming out of a brewery.
So this has like high alcohol content, high sugar content, and the cities or the municipal wastewater treatment plant can't handle it. So we have to treat it on our own, on site, or what?
No, yeah. So you don't necessarily need to treat it on site, and I strongly advise not looking at that option unless it's a last resort. You've literally done all the due diligence you can to avoid it. But the city wastewater treatment plant can take it, but they can't bill for it like they normally would, and they can't treat it like they normally would. So they have to make changes operationally at their end of things, both in the wastewater treatment plant side of things, but also in the billing side of things. So the issue is at a wastewater treatment plant, the way they remove these nutrients is aeration. So they have these huge basins, almost like a gigantic swimming pool, but much bigger and full of wastewater. You wouldn't want to swim in it. But they aerate the water in there. And the amount of air they put into the water is based on the amount of food in the water. So if there's a lot of food, they need to put a lot of air in, which means they need to run their blowers more, whether it's faster or turn on more blowers, and that's horsepower. And horsepower leads to electricity, which leads to a higher bill. So that gets into the billing side of things. This does legitimately add a cost to their process out there. And they can't charge the same way like they would with household wastewater, because again, there's more work to be done per gallon of liquid coming out of a brewery. If that makes sense.
So what are my options? It sounds like I didn't realize that I could just send it to the wastewater treatment plant, but I guess the city will be making sure that I'm testing it to tell them how much food, how much junk is in my wastewater, and then they'll charge me accordingly.
Yeah.
Does that get super expensive? Do I want to look at other options or what?
It can get super expensive. And again, it changes. Every city in the entire country is different. And it's kind of crazy, but it is that way. And there could be a situation of, say there used to be a big factory in town. And then this factory is closed down. It could be a lumber mill, a paper mill, or whatever. And the local wastewater treatment plant was designed to take the wastewater out of that mill. Mill shuts down, so now all of a sudden this wastewater treatment plant is way overbuilt for this little town. So they're looking for food. So if you're a brewery looking to expand or looking to build, that's like the situation you want. Or you want somebody that has a really oversized wastewater treatment plant that is looking for food, because you got it. You've got the food that they need. The other area it could be a town that their wastewater treatment plant is at capacity, or maybe at 80% capacity, and they don't have room for a brewery to come in, because a brewery has a significant impact as far as their daily loading rate. So maybe there's no room, and they'll say they'll deny your application because the wastewater treatment plant can't take it. So there's really got to be careful and pay attention when you're looking at these different towns all over the country. What is their wastewater situation?
Okay, so what are the different agencies, local, state, and federal agencies that I need to check with that govern wastewater?
Yeah, if the brewery's going in a town and there's a sewer system, you'll deal with the public works director, or the head of public works, whatever his title is. And that's pretty much all you need to do. You don't need to worry about the state EPA or the federal EPA, because you'll be under the jurisdiction of the public works director, and he has to worry about those EPA guys.
The Environmental Protection Agency.
Yeah. So if you're out in the country and there is no sewer system and you're looking at septic, then you'll be talking with the state or the county as far as what kind of regulations they'll have. And again, these change all over the country depending on how steep it is, how much rain it gets, what the soil's like. So you never really know until you start asking around.
Okay, so I might have to build a pretty heavy-duty septic system in the ground, I guess, for my brewery if we're outside of city limits somewhere.
Yeah.
If there's no sewage system in place.
Yeah, it gets expensive. And again, it's just not that expensive is a deal killer. It's just something to be aware of versus having it come in down the line. Oh, we've got to do something about our wastewater, and it's going to cost a lot of money.
Okay, so if I haven't opened up a brewery yet. I'm looking into it. What do I need to look at? If I'm in the city, I need to call the public works, and if I'm in the county, I need to call. What are they called?
They would either call the county, like environmental services, or they'll be in the phone book really, or you could look them online as well. But they'll all be named something different.
And where do we go from there?
Well, they'll tell you what you need, and then you could start talking to a septic system engineer or designer on here's what my wastewater is going to be looking like. here's what the requirements coming out of the county are, and we got to come up with something that can do the work that needs to be done to this wastewater. And there might be nothing, or it could be pretty heavy duty. You don't know until you actually know what those requirements are. And as far as knowing what the wastewater looks like coming out of your brewery, we'll get into that a little bit later. Breweries are pretty, they have pretty characteristic wastewater. So even if your brewery doesn't exist yet, I could, or somebody else could tell you pretty accurately what your wastewater characteristics will look like when you first start up, and then as you grow and as you expand.
Okay, I've heard some stories about a brewery opening in a town where no brewery had existed before, and so the municipal agency was just like really struggling to figure out like how to regulate them, what to allow in the permit and stuff like that. But I could just point them to another agency in another jurisdiction where a brewery exists and tell them to get in touch with their counterparts over there to find out what my potential effluent is going to be.
Yeah, one thing to be careful with that is, and this is still fairly common, is, we're in town A, and town A has never had a brewery before, and they have no idea what brewery wastewater looks like. And then town B, 10 miles away or whatever, has a brewery and they're operating. You could talk to the brewery in town B, and talk to the brewery, talk to the public works people, but you'd probably want to make sure that talk to the brewery first and say, how are things? Do you feel like you're being treated fairly from your city? And usually people, when you ask a question like that, people will say, oh, for the most part, but I think we're, kind of getting the shaft in some other area. Versus, no, we're getting screwed straight up. You want to make sure if you're going to send people asking questions around, you want to make sure that kind of there's a good feeling versus, really expensive or really bureaucratic or whatever.
Send them over to the city that doesn't charge very much.
There you go.
So but the brewery that I'm comparing myself to might have a different capacity. So is the dirtiness of my water or the amount of load that I'm going to be putting on the wastewater treatment plant in direct correlation to my capacity?
Maybe. So the one thing you wouldn't, if you're planning a small brewery and there's a big brewery not too far away, you want to make it clear that, we're not going to be putting out near as much wastewater as they are because they're 100 times bigger than I'm ever planning to be. You want to make sure that's clear. But the other thing is, and I mentioned at the beginning, is side streaming. What are they doing at this brewery with their spent yeast and their trub, et cetera? Are they putting it down the drain and out to sewer, or are they separating it at the source and then trucking it off site? And then also, what do you plan on doing at your brewery? Collecting it and trucking it off site, or sending it to the sewer? Because it's a roughly 10 times more concentrated if you don't side stream compared to if you do side stream. So it's not much more volume, but it's really a lot more food or sugar or alcohol, whatever. It's a lot more nutrients in that water if you don't side stream.
So for side stream sources, I'm going to have like a separate tank on site where I'm just pumping all my spent yeast, my trub, my fermenter blow off, my waste beer. Can they all go into the same tank?
Yep.
Is it going to have a lid, like a seal? It can't be sealed because that yeast is probably still going to be making some blow off, huh?
Yeah, you wouldn't want it to be sealed, but it doesn't need to be a fancy tank. You could use a plastic tank, and you could also use a used tank of whatever sort you can find. one thing to be aware of, and another tangent here is if your tanks are underground, don't use plastic, because the wastewater coming out, especially the side stream wastewater, is very hot. Plastic tanks are generally only rated to 120 degrees. But if your tanks are above ground, plastic is just fine. And plastic tanks are cheap. So I would recommend, maybe a big plastic tank above ground. And if you need to pump it in there, maybe a small concrete tank underground with a pump in it.
Don't want my plastic tank melting underground.
Yeah, that'd be a bad day.
Jeez. So you actually made me realize I'm going to probably need to talk to some air quality people too. Is that going to be the subject of another podcast with a different guest?
It can be. Generally, it's not too big of a deal at a brewery. It's more of a nuisance level odors at a brewery. Like, say it's brew day and, the stuff coming out of your kettle stack smells like beer or, wort. Probably 90% of people think that smells great, but there's a certain percentage of the population that thinks it's disgusting. So again, that's kind of the nuisance issue. There's not really any hazard, but it can stink. While we're on this air quality thing, this side stream tank will stink. It'll be probably the stinkiest thing on your whole site. So if you're going to side stream, pay attention to where the wind blows. You don't want it blowing right towards your beer garden or towards your front entrance.
Oh, gross.
Yeah.
Maybe put it off to the side a little bit.
Yeah. But also pay attention to your neighbors. Some breweries are located in fairly industrial environments, and some of them are pretty residential.
Can I put a carbon filter on the top of that thing to help out a little bit?
You can. You can also you could build a biofilter, which is pretty cool. You can look them up online, but it's basically a bunch of compost. And the bacteria in this compost, the tank is vented through this compost pile, and the bacteria eat the sulfur compounds in the odor that generate the odors, and leads to kind of an earthy smell coming out of that compost pile. So another way of doing it.
That's cool. So if I'm starting my brewery and I talk to the public works agencies, they should be able to give me an idea of whether or not they can handle it. And it sounds like I don't really need to hire a professional. But if they can't handle my effluent, or if I'm in the county where or a place where there's no sewage treatment facility or sewage system already there, I'm going to need to call somebody like you to help me out.
Yeah.
Okay.
The biggest thing with the city is, the questions I always start people out with is, find out what percent capacity the local treatment plant is. Maybe it's at 50% capacity or 20% or 80%. You never know until you ask. What you want to hear is we're at 20% capacity. That would make your day. The other is, are they going to charge fees to treat your wastewater? That's a big one because, again, these fees vary town to town, and some towns are pretty fair in how they apply these fees, and some are pretty egregious. At least from our perspective. As from the brewery's perspective, I'm sure they have a different opinion. So again, what's the capacity and what are the fees going to look like if you're discharging to a city?
Okay, so how do I go about finding someone who can help me out with these things? How do I make sure I hire the right person? Like, I don't want to build some huge extravagant project. Like, if it's way more than I need, how can I be sure that the person is qualified and they're not just trying to overbill me with some huge project or whatever?
Yeah. From that perspective, my biggest piece of advice is whoever you're using, make sure they have brewery experience, or at minimum food and beverage. not restaurants, but somebody that's designed a soft drink manufacturing facility or a bakery, commercial bakery. People are familiar with food plants because really you get into things that are over-designed or under-designed when you're dealing with people that think they know what they're talking about. They really don't. So they can, again, really over-design or really under-design. There was a project I worked at in Oregon, and brand new brewery, brand new wastewater system, and within about a week, the wastewater system failed. And the person who designed the system put in drinking water pumps that are designed for zero solids. So of course, brewery wastewater has grain and hops in it and stuff. So these little bits of soft solids were enough to clog up this pump. And right there, they were just wasted $500 or $1,000 on pumps that didn't work. But the person putting them in thought he was doing the right thing, just didn't know enough to know that it wouldn't work.
Oh no.
Yeah. So, try to find people that have, brewery experience, engineers, general contractors, you name it.
So I guess the least expensive option would be preventing my waste in the first place. What kind of conservation practices can we do to help us just make less wastewater to begin with?
Sure. The biggest is to pay attention. And this is I actually have trouble with this with a lot of clients is, your brewery is just starting up or your brewery has been running for years and you get a guy like me coming in. Oh, how much water are you using per barrel? And I was, I don't know. I don't even track those kind of numbers. Or, how many kilowatt hours are you using per barrels? And they'll say, I have no idea. Why should I care? So pay attention. That's where your efficiency starts. Come up with kind of how much water are you using per barrel of beer brewed or per barrel of beer packaged, either way. How much wastewater are you generating per barrel? How much electricity or natural gas, you name it, are you using per barrel? And for right now, your first year or so, you don't really care what the answer is. You're just gathering data. But this is something you should do once a month, really forever, is track these usage numbers. And then if you decide, we're using too much water per barrel or we're generating too much wastewater, then you can start looking around, where can we make improvements? How long is our rinse cycle on our CIP? Can we reuse that rinse water from CIP as pre-rinse in another tank? Or, you name it, just start
how do I do those kinds of things? I took a tour of Ninkasi Brewery, and they said they were really emphasizing how they save water. I'm trying to think of what they said. I think they said they sort of use blasts when they're rinsing their tanks rather than just letting the water run. What's that all about?
Yeah, so there's a lot of times CIP means clean in place, and it's how you clean the inside of your vessels in your brew house and in your fermenters and bright tanks. So you're not getting in there with a brush and scrubbing. You're using a recirculation system and some chemicals in the water. So anyway, one way to CIP is to recirculate the water kind of continuously, always at the same speed, always at the same pressure, same temperature. And that works. But what also works is to run the CIP in surges. So you can, every 20 seconds or 10 seconds or whatever interval you want, you could really increase your volume, increase your pressure on your CIP pump to kind of pulse the CIP water that's coming out the spray ball at the top of the vessel. It can save energy. It can save water and chemical because you're not having to use so much, because you're with a constant recirculation system. You have to kind of keep the suction side of the pump continuously submerged in water, versus if you pulse it, you can kind of use up whatever reservoir you have ahead of your pump, pulse it, and then wait for it to drain back down and then do it again, which ultimately saves water and saves chemical is the big thing, because that's where your costs are.
And what about when I hear this is a way to save energy as well as water, that the cooling water can be used to clean my vessels? How does that work in saving water?
I don't know. I'm not sure I quite understand what whoever's definition of cooling water is. When I think cooling water, I'm thinking cooling tower water, which you definitely wouldn't want to reuse. But maybe they're thinking cooling water from the heat exchanger after the whirlpool going out to the cellar.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. You could certainly use that. A better use for it is for your next brew. Put the water into your hot liquor tank and use it to make your next brew. But if you're
okay, that's probably what I was thinking of.
Yeah, if you're only doing one brew a day, though, you don't need to put it into the hot liquor tank. You could and save it for the next day, but if there's one a week or one, whatever, if you don't need the water, you could certainly use it as pre-rinse in your fermenter or bright tank.
Is there anybody that just gets rid of that cooling water from the heat exchanger? It seems like such a waste.
I'm yeah, it would be a waste, but there's probably a few people out there, and again, that are doing it just because they don't know any better. But I would imagine that most people are reusing it, storing it in the hot liquor tank and using it for the next brew. But then there's always, again, it's the last brew of the week, or you're only doing one a day, and what am I going to do with all this hot water? Because I don't need it now.
Take a bath.
Yeah, sure.
Well, now we have a question from one of our listeners. Megan Tolbert asked, how low environmental impact is your business? I think she was talking about breweries, but I wanted to ask you, so how much can we reduce our environmental impact by thinking about these wastewater issues at the brewery?
Yeah, it can be a major impact. And again, it's paying attention. Where are you using your water? Where are you using your electricity, your energy and other sources, compressed air or whatever? And can we save? There's a lot of times, people just do it because we've always done it that way. So again, it's asking the question, okay, so we've always done it this way, but do we need to? Is it the right way? Is there a more energy efficient way of doing, whatever it is? There's some pretty good examples out there of breweries that have saved a whole lot in their kind of environmental footprint by paying attention, figuring out where the energy is going, where the water's going, and asking, what can we do to save this? And, a lot of times people don't know. They might, the person doing the audit, whether it's a manager or supervisor or anybody really, they don't know where the water's going and if we're doing it the right way. But when you go out and start asking the people that are actually the operators, the brewer, the packaging guys, hey, do you guys see any low-hanging fruit where we can start saving our hot water usage, or we can make our CIP more efficient, or whatever? The operators will be the first guys to talk to for sure.
So there's a lot of ways we can improve and reduce the environmental impact from our brewery. And it's something that I really like about the craft beer industry and just the community in general, particularly the industry folks. It seems like breweries really emphasize that their product is coming from, like, packaging is coming from recycled material. And a lot of breweries are installing solar panels and just taking a lot more sustainability and environmental initiatives.
Yeah. One thing to kind of make clear, when you see businesses, and this isn't brewery specific, it's kind of business in general. When you see them start adding solar panels or doing water efficiency measures or electricity efficiency measures, a lot of times, I can't say every time, but a lot of times what they're really looking at is the bottom line, dollars. They're trying to save money, and if they can do it by putting in a solar panel, that's great. Let's put in a solar panel, and then we'll say, oh, look how good we are because we put in this solar panel, but really what led them to put in the solar panel was an opportunity to save some money.
Well, Yvon Chouinard's book, Yvon Chouinard is the founder of Patagonia, and he wrote a book about his company and his what I got a lot about it was mostly the environmental and social impact of his company. The book is called Let My People Go Surfing. And he spent a lot of the book talking about reducing environmental impact from his company. And then there was quite a bit section devoted to the bottom line too. And his accountants kept on telling him, no, you're going to be losing money. You can't do this. And he was like, you know what? I own this company. We're going to make this change anyway. And they ended up making more money when they would make these kinds of initiatives. So he's like, you know what? You can help the environment and it will also help your bottom line too.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's great. I think Yvon Chouinard is kind of an exception to the rule when it comes to CEO type guys. But there's certainly opportunity to save money and improve the bottom line and be better for the environment as well.
All right, now it's time for happy hour. The next set of questions are a little lighter. We're going to get to know each other a little better and have some fun and get inside the industry. Are you ready, John?
Sure thing.
Okay, cans or bottles?
Bottles.
Bottles all the way, huh?
Yeah, cans are nice. Everybody kind of gives the example for cans is, you can take them hiking or boating or whatever. But, I think most people are having beer at their house or in a bar, and I don't want to drink out of a can. I think, there's some argument out there about which one's actually more sustainable, a bottle or a can, and there isn't just one answer. But I certainly prefer the way beer feels and tastes coming out of a bottle.
I'm working on a blog right now, and I don't have the results yet, but it's all about this question because it seems really, it seems like a lot of opinion or perception or feeling goes into it. So I wanted to get to the bottom of it, and I did a couple of different taste tests with my friends. And the results aren't out yet. Sometimes we like can better. Sometimes we like bottle better. We didn't always know which was which. I still need to analyze the results some more, but I'll be publishing that pretty soon.
Yeah.
What's the most challenging beer that you've ever made? You should do home brewing.
Yeah, I used to home brew. This was getting close to 20 years ago. And when I started working at Deschutes, my home brew didn't stack up to the beer coming out of Deschutes Brewery. So I stopped home brewing, one, because the quality wasn't as good, and the other was we got a lot of free beer. So there was no need to home brew. And now that I'm out of working for breweries directly, I've been looking at getting back into home brewing. But I have a baby. I have a farm. I have this brewery work going on. I'm pretty busy, and I could always say I'm too busy and not be, but I've been looking at getting into it, and we'll see. something's got to present itself at the right price.
Do you remember a beer that was particularly tricky?
I'm a fan of weird beers. And so when somebody says, "Oh, I've got this sour porter," or you name it, that's what'll drag me, is something that I've never had before. So when I was homebrewing, I made a beer with I can't remember the type, but it had tea in it, and it was pretty good. And I wouldn't say it was the most challenging, but certainly when you start looking at ingredients in your beer besides malt and hops, you start to get looked at a little bit funny from your friends or from people who try your beer. So having tea in there was certainly unique.
I think that's something that's really driving craft beer sales right now, is the creativity and ingenuity and adding a bunch of funky stuff in there.
Yeah, I think it's great.
So if you're going to make a 5-gallon batch at home this weekend, let's say you're going to take it up and you got the home brewing itch, what kind of beer would you make at home this weekend?
If I had the know-how to do it, I'd do a sour beer of some sort. But without, I don't have the knowledge yet to do a sour beer, so I would probably do a big heavy stout. Winter's coming on. By the time it's ready, it'll be chilly. So,
tell me one beer style that you think will be gaining more attention.
I think I mentioned it, that the sours, they don't all need to be as insane sour as some of them are nowadays, but the sour can be more mellow as well, and really refreshing, and more of a kind of a session beer, a sour session beer. I think that's got a lot of potential. I'd like to say that smoked beers have a lot of potential, but they probably don't. But I'm a big fan of smoked beers as well.
And can you suggest a book for our audience that will maybe help them succeed in opening a successful brewery, or maybe a Wastewater book?
Yeah, one of my favorite books in the brewing world that I read recently was Beyond the Pale from Ken Grossman, the president owner of Sierra Nevada. It's certainly not a Wastewater book, but it's a great book to read about kind of the history of Sierra Nevada. I know I had my own preconceptions about Sierra Nevada before I read the book, and after reading the book, it shot my preconceptions, out the window, and I have a whole different respect for Sierra Nevada as a company nowadays.
What were the preconceptions that got shot out of the water?
Well, one is, they're swimming in money. They've, and I like Sierra Nevada a lot. I like their beer and I like the company, but, I, from one way or another, heard that they've got a lot of money. Not that that's a bad thing again, but anyway, reading the book, you read about how much they struggled with money, all the way up until really current. I mean, they just built a brand new brewery. I'm sure they're struggling with money just as much as anybody right now. But that was a big eye opener. Is they've just like everybody else, that money is a big thing. They didn't come into it with money, and they certainly aren't swimming in money now. So interesting.
Yeah, it's a pretty big investment to make a gigantic brewery in North Carolina. So I'm sure they got a pretty big mortgage to pay.
Yeah, exactly.
But something, I don't know, Sierra Nevada's been getting kind of a bad rap lately just because of their size alone. But something that I really respect is I feel like they're being really creative, and they're still keeping the ingenuity and making really interesting beers. And the beer camp is always really fun. The 12 collaboration beers that come in a case. It shows that they're helping the other breweries that aren't as well known as themselves, and they want to kind of help the other people succeed too. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you listeners want to check out this book, I'll be adding it on. It's already in. It might go up a notch with this additional recommendation. It's at microbrewer.com/book list is where all the books that have been recommended are. So, John, tell me something that you're really excited about right now.
Well, in the brewing world, I'm excited that, craft brewery is still growing and going strong after 20 plus years. People were even in the mid 90s, there was a big contraction in the craft brewing scene because breweries didn't get things right. So a lot of breweries went out of business and people were thinking, oh, this is the end. And here we are 20 years later, growing at a pace that nobody would have imagined. So it's really exciting. Life in general, I have an organic farm that I own here in Colorado. I raise grass-fed beef and a variety of other animals, and then I have vegetables as well. So that's a never-ending source of joy for me and frustration, I must say, as well.
Keeping it country.
Yeah.
Very nice. Give us one last piece of advice for someone who just brewed the first batch at their new brewery, and then we'll close up the brew house for the night.
Okay. Yeah, you just brewed your first batch of beer. Awesome. But now, pay attention to where your wastewater is going. Hopefully you've done this already, but don't just dump it all down the drain. You have some mindfulness. Where's the trube going to go? Where are your rinsings from your hop back, if you have one? Where are they going to go? What about your brew kettle? The rinsings there, or your plates on the bottom side of your plates in your lauter tun. Where's all that water going to go? Hopefully, at a minimum, it'll go to your sewer treatment plant, but side stream it. Use it for beneficial use by putting it on soil. That's kind of my bent to this whole thing is, do some beneficial use with it.
Take good notes, be mindful, and keep track.
And pay attention, yeah.
Pay attention, okay. Thanks for taking the time, John. It's really helpful. Thanks for sharing your tips on keeping our brewery in compliance and helping to keep water clean. So tell us how we can stay in touch with you, and then we'll set this episode aside to ferment.
Okay, thanks, Nathan. My website is brewerywastewater.com. My email is John, John, at brewerywastewater.com. And I have other contact information there as well. There's a ton of free information on that website with respect to wastewater and just other byproducts coming out of a brewery. So you can spend hours reading through what I put on there. And once you go cross-eyed and you have more questions, please give me a call. Love to help out.
Yeah, there is a ton of information on that website that you could practically publish a book out of all the free information that John is providing about managing wastewater at your brewery. So thanks again, John.
Okay, absolutely, Nathan. Thank you.
Again, thank you, John Mercer, for being on MicroBrewr Podcast. Thanks for teaching us more about wastewater issues at a microbrewery. And listeners, don't forget to take advantage of John's offer to answer any of your questions. He'll watch the comment section of the show notes for the next 30 days, and he'll answer as many of your questions as he can. So be sure to put your questions in at the show notes. And down below the show notes, there's a comments section, and you can find that at microbrewer.com/session33. So please check out Brewery Wastewater Design, and thank John for being on the show and for answering your questions too. Be sure to take advantage of that opportunity. You can find links to get in touch with John Mercer and Brewery Wastewater Design at the show notes for this episode at microbrewer.com/session33. And I added some other links about wastewater information as well. Feel free to hit me up anytime. You could send me an email at microbrewer.com/contact through the form there. And MicroBrewr is also on Twitter and Facebook at MicroBrewr in both places. I am on Untapped at Nathan Pierce. So send me a friend request. We could check out what each other's drinking and toast your check-ins. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast in iTunes or Stitcher. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, support your local brewery, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to MicroBrewr Podcast with Nathan Pierce. We'll see you right here next time at microbrewery.com.
If you want more resources for starting a craft brewery, check out microbrewer.com, microbrewer.com. If you want to become a Cicerone certified beer server, check out beerexamschool.com for free study guide and flashcards for the certified beer server exam. beerexamschool.com.